Okay, great. I think everybody's in listen-only mode, but if that is not the case, if you could make sure that you are muted, we would really appreciate it. So thank you all for attending. I'd like to welcome our panelists today, all of our membership, our guests, and the press. We have a great program for you today entitled Expanding Black and Minority-Owned Businesses, Inclusive Job Growth Requires Faster Job Growth. And we're excited to get started on that and introduce our panelists in just a few minutes. We have a few housekeeping items before we get started. For the members that are out there, I'd like to move for the approval of the December 17th, 2019 and the May 14th, 2020 membership meeting minutes. So I know we're all muted, but I think I can hear through that. So board members, can I have a second? Thank you. And all those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Thank you. Opposed? Thank you. The membership meetings are now approved. Thanks very much. Okay, the financial statements and our membership contribution report, as usual, are in the packet beside, which was emailed you prior to today. So please see Tony Pipitone or Rowena Gutierrez if you have any questions regarding those. They would be sure to help you out. We still would like to thank those firms that have joined in 2020, HDR Architecture, Post Brothers, Rittenhouse Realty, and National Real Estate Advisors. We appreciate it. Hopefully some of those representatives are here today. And if you are interested in joining or you have a referral to join CPDC, please contact Romina Gutierrez and she can certainly assist you in doing that. Okay, we'd like to provide you with a brief, very brief, before our panel starts today, update on what CCD has been doing in their ongoing programs during this COVID period. Paul and his entire team at CCD are doing so many fantastic positive things to support our recovery that I actually asked him to start today's presentation and before he introduces the panelists, to provide us with a brief update on exactly what CCD has been working on, and he will do that in just a few minutes. Additionally, Paul and Prima Gupta, who does an incredible job overseeing all of our parks and our streetscape improvements, have created a presentation of not only how CCD programs are currently focused on recovery and safely returning to the workplace, but also highlighting the extraordinary items such as Plant Center City, providing educational programs in our parks, extra graffiti cleanup, things like that. And these types of things obviously require additional funding and or sponsorships. And as a matter of fact, I checked with Paul's agent and prior to the meeting today, and he and Prima are available to do virtual presentations for employers, employees, clients, which would be an incredible opportunity for you. And it highlights the recovery programs that are currently in place during COVID, and he reviews the additional funding that is necessary to implement some of these other fantastic programs. So if you are interested in having a virtual presentation at your company or learning more about it, please contact Romina and she can assist you in obtaining that. All right, now I pass the unmuted microphone, I believe, to Paul Levy to start our program. So Paul.
Good morning, Jim, and thank you everybody for joining. And I want to welcome our guests from out of town as well. As Jim said, before I get into the panel, I just want to spend a few minutes on what we've been doing in recovery. But the bulk of my presentation will be to summarize the report we released at the end of August, which we entitled Getting More Philadelphians Back to Work, Business Density and the Role of Black and Minority-Owned Businesses. We're going to be focusing on that subject today, and we have as our keynote speaker Ron Busby, who's the president and CEO of the U.S. Black Chambers, who's going to really start off the conversation about what needs to be done, both what's being done nationally, but what do we need to do here. We'll be very pleased as respondents to have Stephen Bradley, who's the president of the African American Chamber, Della Clark, who's the president and CEO of the Enterprise Center in West Philadelphia, and Jerry Sweeney, president and CEO of Brandywine Realty Trust. So let me move very, very quickly, and let me start with a little bit of good news about the recovery that we have underway within Center City. Since March, all of our CCD personnel were declared essential workers. We've maintained them on the street, been cleaning sidewalks, pressure washing with sanitizers, And we've hired specially crews of formerly homeless and returning citizens, ex-offenders, who are also helping us remove graffiti from all publicly owned street furniture. We've painted over graffiti on boarded up storefronts. We commissioned artists to install graphics on those stores that were not open. And most interestingly, at this point, we'll be releasing this report next week. While you may have an outdated image of the summer when we had 275 boarded up premises in Center City, we're down to just 88, and that's out of almost 1,800 establishments. 79% of all of our restaurants and retail have reopened. Our community service representatives have continued their patrols on the street, serving as a friendly and reassuring presence. And we resumed our outreach partnership with Project Home. Since June, we've got 66 individuals who've come off the street, transported to shelter. That's building on the 196 people we were able to persuade in partnership with Project Home to come off the street last year. Simply because there were no banner clients, we retained 6 women artists to design banners that we deployed throughout Center City through the summer. And a lot of work, particularly Prima and her team, have been working on supporting and celebrating and enabling restaurant reopenings and weekend street closures. We promoted through our marketing team a very successful and modified restaurant week. And I think the measure of this for us simply is pedestrian volumes. You see on the left the precipitous drop in pedestrian volumes in March. We slowly built through the summer to only about 33% of prior year volumes. But since Labor Day, we've been at 42, 43% of volume same time last year. So we're only about halfway there, but we're halfway through recovery at this point. We restored interactively programming Dilworth Park. At Collins Park, we've hosted a series of socially distanced events. We're actively programming our children's park, Sister Cities Park. We reopened this in June with new additions, new attractions for children. And so there's good news out there. There's a slow and cautious recovery. Though the key part, office buildings and hotels remain mostly empty. So that's a huge challenge that is before us. But today's focus is to look on an unresolved challenge that predates the pandemic. That's a historic challenge that we faced. And so I want to spend about 4 minutes, 5 minutes just summarizing the report before we get to our panelists. We looked at a series of data that's available from the American Business Survey and analyzed the total number of firms in Philadelphia and the number of Black, Hispanic, Asian, and white-owned firms. And we compared this to 4 other East Coast cities, Boston, New York, Washington, and Atlanta. We created a simple measure of business density, which is the relationship of the number of businesses or firms in a city to its adult working population. And what this does is enable a shorthand estimate of opportunity. The higher the ratio of firms to residents, the more potential opportunity exists within the boundaries of the city. And we focused particularly on Black-owned firms and looked at the relationship between those firms and the number of Black residents. I'll read this to you because the type is so small, but this was a core finding here. We confirmed what we know are huge nationwide disparities, but most disturbingly, the disparities are even greater in Philadelphia. The red box is showing the number of Black-owned businesses per 1,000 Black residents in the city. Atlanta has a ratio of 4.7 firms per 1,000 residents, New York 3.4, Boston 2.5, Washington, the leader here at 5.0, Philadelphia at 1.8. The blue box is showing all firms, and you can see that Atlanta has 24.6 firms per all residents. Philadelphia is at half that, at 12.1. To see that visually, you can see it in these bar charts. Dark blue is the number of Black-owned businesses. Teal is total businesses. From the left, it's Atlanta, New York, Boston, and Washington. One, you see the national disparities between overall businesses and the small percentage Black-owned businesses represent. But you also see how Philadelphia here lags these other cities. Quite simply, Atlanta's business density is 2 times the business density of Philadelphia, and Black-owned businesses have a 2.5 times density to Philadelphia. This corresponds, incidentally, to a series of reports, a report that Pew did that focused on all types of small and medium-sized businesses. And they compared 12 cities, and Philadelphia was absolutely at the bottom in terms of the number of density of small and medium sizes businesses of all sizes. They also found that our birth rate of new businesses was well below the Now, in our study, we were able to break out between white, black, Asian, and Hispanic, and the arrow is pointing, teal here is Philadelphia, and you see Philadelphia lagging in the number of white-owned businesses, lagging in the number of black-owned businesses, slightly ahead of Boston in Asian businesses, and lagging in Hispanic businesses. All our businesses also lag in average revenues, a key indicator of the success of those businesses and the volume of work that they're doing. Our businesses trail in the average number of employees, whether they are white businesses, Hispanic businesses, or black businesses. We trail in terms of number of employees. Overall, we have a lower job density in the city compared to the region. And the most shocking part for me here is I always think about Atlanta as the Los Angeles of the East Coast, a low density sprawl city, but they actually have greater job density in the city of Atlanta than in the region. You can see our job density in the city is below the job density in the region. That obviously produces this particular problem. Dark blue is the city here, teal is the region. We have less jobs per resident in the city versus the region. This explains a lot of our reverse commuting that's going on. And so no surprise, and the most disturbing implication of this, of course, is of all those cities, we have the lowest workforce participation of adults of all kinds. So we concluded in this report, as I think everyone has nationally, that the pandemic caused a huge spike in unemployment across all sectors, but that Black residents and Black businesses have been disproportionately challenged by this crisis. It's been exacerbated by centuries of structural disparities, and Black-owned businesses in our city therefore face a double barrier of racism and limited business density of Philadelphia for all firms. I think the conclusion we reached, recovery for Black businesses, for all businesses, isn't simply a return to status quo. We've got to exceed where we were before, and I'll just take 2 to 3 minutes on that, and then I'll wrap up. We need to do more than rebound as we come out of this recession. You've seen this graphic from me before, the long job loss we've had since 1970, losing 286,000 jobs. As we lost jobs, the poverty rate rose, but as you'll note, the number in poverty went up significantly, but the loss of middle class and working class residents was 5 times greater as we lost jobs from the city. We were in a great rebound since the Great Recession, and it lifted us within striking distance of employment levels that we were at in 1990, but you can see we were still 22% below our job levels in 1970. That is not the fate of all old cities. Boston and New York also lost 85 to 95% of their 1970 manufacturing job levels, but Boston's total employment is 27% above its 1970 job levels. New York is 17% above its 1970 job levels. We are 22% below. This leaves us the legacy of what I would call incomplete revival. Having not replaced lost jobs, we have the highest poverty rate of the 10 largest American cities. We have disparities in workforce participation, and if I can be really blunt, poverty is not the failing of those in poverty. It's the failure of Philadelphia to produce enough jobs and to create enough new firms. We are the slowest, or almost the slowest growing of the 25 largest American cities. I don't want to minimize the positives of growth. We were growing at 1.5% a year since 2009, but the 26 largest American cities were growing at 2.4%. We were in a very positive recovery for us. We were growing at the fastest rate and the most sustained rate since the 1920s. The pandemic came along and wiped out all the job gains back to 2016. That's the challenge we've been facing. We don't have the data yet for August, but we've been slowly regaining jobs. But as I said, getting back to status quo pre-COVID is not good enough. Just as Black businesses face a double challenge, so does Philadelphia in recovery. We need to rebound, but we need to grow faster and more inclusively than in the last decade. We require faster growth of Black-owned businesses and businesses of all kinds. That's the challenge I've really asked our panelists to address at this point. Because Ron Busby was introduced to me by Stephen Bradley, I'd like Stephen to do a brief introduction of Ron and then hand the floor over to Ron. Stephen?
Well, good morning, everyone. And it's my privilege to welcome Ron Busby to the Philadelphia region into our conversation this morning. Ron comes with extensive background, corporate, civic, and Ron has been very passionate about African-American chambers all around the country. When I became chair several years ago, I reached out to Ron. I said, Ron, I need you to come to Philly and motivate our membership here. Ron got on a train and was immediately there. Last year, I had the privilege of going to a conference that Ron hosts for all the chambers in DC. It was just so refreshing to see not only senior chamber leadership, but young leadership. All the workshops, all the entertainment was all geared towards both generations, senior and young. And that type of leadership, Ron has been consistent about. He has great relationships with our government officials all around the country. And Ron, I appreciate you giving up your morning to talk to our region today. Welcome to Philadelphia.
Well, thank you, Stephen. Thank you to the city of Philadelphia, and thank you to the listening audience as well. Again, Ron Busby, President and CEO of the U.S. Black Chamber. I really start the conversation by saying I always wanted to live in Philadelphia. Philadelphia was like the East Coast version of Oakland, California, where I was born, well, not born, but where I grew up. And so I was always in a Sunbelt environment, left Oakland and then moved to Tallahassee, Florida, where I went to college. And right after college, I had an opportunity to go anywhere in the country to get a job. And I had a bunch of classmates at Florida A&M, and they were from Philadelphia. And so I said, great. And I took a job in Lindenwold, New Jersey. Really, the offices were in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. I actually lived in Lindenwold. But on the weekends, I would venture over to Philadelphia to get my taste of cheesesteaks and great entertainment. So I've always loved the city of Philadelphia. But as your statistics showed, I was laid off and could not find a job in Philadelphia. So I ended up forced to move and ended up moving back south to Texas. But always love the conditions of Philadelphia, and it's really disheartening to see what's happening in your city. But like so many cities around the country, it's not unique to Philadelphia, but there are things that we can do. Again, I was in corporate America, IBM, Xerox, Coca-Cola, senior VP there. Left there, started my own firm back in Oakland, California, grew it from a very small firm of 5 employees to ultimately having over 1,500 employees across the country. We're the largest Black janitorial service in the country. Ended up leaving there, moving to Philadelphia. My wife passed, and so I had 2 young sons at the age of 5 and 6. We moved to Phoenix, started my second firm, and had the opportunity to get involved in the local Chamber of Commerce there, the Phoenix Chamber. Got involved, and like most leaders, raised my hand and asked a question. They said, great question, Ron, you got that committee. After a few months of serving, ended up getting the opportunity to serve on the board. As most of you leaders know, it went from a board seat to a board chair, and then ultimately became the president of the Greater Phoenix Black Chamber of Commerce. Had the opportunity to be very involved with our governor there, Governor Janet Napolitano. She was the first governor to come out to endorse then Senator Barack Obama for president. I play a lot of golf. At the time, he played a little bit of golf as well. I did not know him. She said, hey, I have this guy, he loves to play golf. He does a lot of meetings here in Arizona. Would you like to meet him? He's trying to do something national. I said, great. We went out and played golf a few times. He was stuttering, smoking cigarettes, hitting the ball everywhere. I asked him what his intentions were, and he said he wanted to be president of the United States. I said, man, your middle name is Hussein. it's right after 9/11, it's not going to happen. But if it does, we'll support you here in Arizona. I was a very close friend with John McCain. I had the Cardinal Stadium contract for the janitorial service. He had the Cardinal Stadium for Budweiser distributorship for all the beer that was there. So he and I got to be very close friends. But when Barack Obama won, he said, "I won't forget you." A lot of people say a lot of things, but he didn't. He won, and he asked me to come to Washington, D.C. to start the U.S. Black Chamber. At the time, we had 6 chambers. And Stephen, the reason why I'm so excited about participating here, he saw the future. He saw what we could become, and he signed up to become a member of the U.S. Black Chamber. Today, we have over 145 chambers. We're located in 42 states, including Canada and 6 countries in Africa, and have a membership base of over 332,000 Black-owned businesses. We were really founded on 5 key pillars, and the first one being advocacy. When I first moved to Washington, D.C., I remember taking a bus tour, and I sat on the top deck, and it was cold outside, snow. I was so excited, and I remember looking out at the vehicles that were passing us. On the back of our license plate, it literally read taxation without representation. And for so many Black business owners, that's the way we feel. We feel like we have been paying taxes into a system that has really not represented our best interests. And so our first one was advocate. Our second one, which we'll talk a lot about today, is access to capital. And when you ask any small business owner what their number one concern is, they will say affordable and accessible access to capital. But when you ask a Black business owner, they will say their number 1, number 2, as well as number 3 concern is affordable and available access to capital. Understand that everything being equal, we could have the same acumen, the same skills, the same business plan. I could own my home. My white neighbor could rent his home or her home. We could both go to the bank with the same idea. I'm going to get half of the rate. I'm going to get half of the money that I've asked for. They're going to get the full amount, and I'm going to pay twice the rate for it. So we have to deal with access to capital, and not just having it available, but having it affordable. Our third one is about contracts, and all of us are looking to grow our businesses. We look at it from 3 different vantage points. Where's the government spending its money, and how can we get our businesses more in line there? Where's corporate America spending their dollars? Usually when we go to corporate America, they say, yes, we would love to do more business with Black businesses, but we either can't find them or they don't have the size and the scale. And so we've created solutions for both of those, and we'll talk about those this morning. And then also our third pillar as it relates to access to capital is, where are Black people spending our dollar? You usually hear the concept of Black Americans having $1.3 trillion of spend power, and that is going up each and every year, approximately 114% versus our white counterparts. But you never hear Black people talking about, we have $1 trillion. That's usually corporate America saying, Black people have $1 trillion. How can we market to them to make sure that they spend their money with us? And so we have to change the conversation to say, we have $1 trillion. How do we keep that $1 trillion in our communities to make sure that our communities have the resources and the sustainability to be able to get through not just tough times, but to have sustainability? Our fourth one is entrepreneurial training. And 99% of Black businesses aren't mom and pop, they're mom or pop. They're doing less than $100,000 a year. But consistently, all the firms that are doing above $1 million have one thing in common, and that is continuing education. They're listening to seminars such as this. They're taking online classes. They're involved in a local chamber. They may even be going to college to continue to expand their skill set as well as their knowledge to grow their businesses. And lastly, as Stephen discussed, it's about chamber development. We believe that our chambers of commerce across the country really are the eyes and ears for our local communities to relay those informations back to Washington, D.C., as well as vice versa, to make sure that we have the strongest chambers across the country. So when Stephen asked me to discuss this morning the state of Black business and how the city of Philadelphia can take advantage of what's going on right now, I was really interested in the conversation. It is a difficult time right now for America, particularly African Americans, as we've seen really a trifecta impact on our communities. The first one was the virus itself. And so many of us heard, well, initially, well, Black folk can't catch the virus. And we found out that to be not true. We are actually more susceptible to catching the virus and dying from the virus than any other ethnic group in America. The second leg of that trifecta was really the stimulus package. So after we found out that the virus was potentially killing hundreds of thousands of Americans, America decided that they were going to create a stimulus package. And if you remember, when it first came out that Friday afternoon, there was talk of a 439 billion recovery package. And between Friday afternoon and Saturday evening, 250 of that 349 billion had already been handed out to 50 publicly traded white firms. No questions asked. It wasn't, where are you going to spend the money? Have you lost revenue? Did you have to lay off people? It was just distribution, redistribution of taxpayer dollars to ensure that these firms had what they needed to get through. And it was really about protecting their payroll, their employees, not the employees of America, particularly not the employees of small businesses. If it was called a payroll protection plan, and of the 2.6 million Black firms that we own and operate across the country, 2.5 million have no employees. So it was never really created for Black-owned businesses. We have 1099 employees, we have subcontractors, we have family members that work for us that we pay. We have also, many of our businesses are cash and carry, but they don't have payroll. And so many of those firms were excluded. The other side was the EIDL loan program. And for most Black businesses, they said, well, I don't want to take a loan to be able to get through these tough times. And so early on, the U.S. Black Chamber was saying we are going to lose 35 to 40% of our Black-owned businesses based upon the surveys that we were seeing across the country. No one really was taking and paying attention to that conversation until the Federal Reserve Bank came out and said, actually, we had lost 41% of Black-owned businesses. 441,000 Black-owned businesses across America closed between the months of February and April. That's nearly 500,000 firms closed during a period of time where we didn't know how we were going to continue to grow our local communities. And then the third piece of that trifecta was the killing of George Floyd. Thus, we thought that our lives did not matter to America. Thus, you saw the movement of Black Lives Matter. And because of those three pandemics all together, our community has truly suffered. And so the U.S. Black Chamber has created some ideas and some concepts of which we think can really move the needle forward for not just across the country, but particularly there in Philadelphia. We looked at some cases across the country in cities very similar to what's happening there in Philadelphia to see what they were doing and how it might be able to also move Philadelphia in a more positive environment for Black people. And the first one is, it's got to be intentionality. Historically, when we've talked about challenges for Black businesses and Black communities, the solutions have always been about minority and inclusion, diversity programs. You can't say that all boats are going to rise when you're painting a broad brush, because when you include diversity programs, it's not hitting the businesses and the communities that have been touched and hit the hardest. Black businesses have been hit twice as hard than any other ethnic community in America. And so in this particular time, it's got to be intentional. It can't be about minority, it's got to be about Black. If you really want to determine what the future of Philadelphia is going to look like, you have to address those businesses that have been hit the hardest. And based on your statistics and data there, it really has been the Black firms. And so the first things we're asking for is that when we create programs, that they have to be intentional and they have to be not just broad brush, but they have to be intentional for Black-owned businesses. The second piece of that is really got to be Black businesses being certified. This is just like the this is just like the census. Things that get measured get acted upon. Right now, the number of Black firms that we say is 2.6 million, but we've been using that number since 2009. And we feel like there has been a lot of growth in the number of Black-owned businesses, but there's no real way to be able to account for that. Right now, if I'm a Black-owned firm, the only way I can be certified is through a minority MWBE program, Minority Women Entrepreneur Business. I'm not a minority. I'm not a woman. I'm not small. I'm Black. And so I need to be able to be counted as a Black-owned business. But right now, the only certification for a Black-owned business is either through the federal government's 8A program, which is very costly, very convoluted, and it takes a long time. If I'm a small business, I want to be able to get certified quick so that when I go to corporate America as a chamber of commerce and say, spend more money with Black firms, you can actually determine that they are Black and you know where they are because they've been certified by an agency. The other agencies, the Minority Supplier Development Council, and for many small businesses, it's just too expensive. And so the U.S. Black Chamber, along with our chambers of commerce across the country, have created a Buy Black, BYBLACK.US platform for all Black-owned businesses in America to be found on this platform, to be certified as Black-owned businesses, so that now we can really tell corporate America, federal governments and agencies, as well as just individuals across the country, where they can go shop and spend money with Black firms. That is extremely important as we really start to determine how we're going to move our cities forward, because we know that Black businesses hire Black people. We know that Asian firms hire Asian people, Hispanic firms hire Hispanic people. And so for us, we've got to make sure that we're being intentional about the efforts that we're doing. We've created policy here in Washington, D.C. that will also help local communities. And one of the things that we're saying is that during seasons like this, especially during election time, there's going to be a lot of conversation about infrastructure, rebuilding. And for us, we're saying that we have to be intentional about making sure that we have someone that sits either in the mayor's office or someone that's there monitoring contracts that are being awarded before they go out. There's got to be accountability early on that says, hey, if we have a contract, that we're going to monitor first tier, second tier, third tier contracts so that small businesses have the opportunity to grow through subcontract opportunities. We know that we've lost 40% of our businesses, but that also means that there's opportunity for joint ventures, mergers, and where it makes sense, acquisitions. It is extremely important for us not to lose the revenue that is already in our communities because our businesses are out of business. We've still got to keep those business models in our city. We know that they had the revenue, they had employees, contractors, and subcontractors that they employed. We cannot afford to let that leave our communities. And so it's extremely important that we remove all barriers for access to capital for our small businesses so they can continue to grow. In the city of Detroit, it was very similar to what's going on there in Philadelphia. They have a program now that they created with their city for $100 million. Out of that, $20 million was set aside for Black-owned firms to be able to grow. They were for grants and technical assistance. Many of our small businesses weren't able to compete for payroll protection plan, not because they were financial illiterate or they didn't have paperwork. They just didn't understand the process and they didn't have the relationships with the banking institutions. And so for our local chambers there, as well as the elected officials, it is extremely important to make sure that there are relationships for your financial institutions to make sure that they partner with local Black-owned businesses so that they can have sustainability in their communities. I'll end by saying this. In order for there to be a great Philadelphia, there's got to be great Black businesses. And in order for there to be great Black businesses, there needs to be a great Black chamber. And in order for there to be a great Black chamber, there needs to be great relationships between the elected officials, corporates that are there, as well as the citizens in the community. And I think when all of them come together, you have a positive future for the city of Philadelphia, as well as the Black residents and Black business owners that are there. Thank you.
Ron, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us. I'd like Stephen now as our first respondent to give his comments, and then we'll move right through the panel. Stephen? If I could say also, just if you have questions, use the chat function. Romina will tabulate them and I'll read them back to our panelists when we finish their responses. Stephen, you on?
Sure. I mean, Ryan, again, I think you touched upon a lot of key points, especially intentionality is very crucial. I mean, everybody really has to look in the mirror and make a commitment that we're going to be intentional about this. We're not going to apologize this. But again, if our region is going to make some strong inroads today, we have to be intentional about it. And I think things such as spending power, such as, you know, expanding our diversity, vending and suppliers is crucial. And I just think those are just, equity is paramount. You know, we employ people of color, we employ people with criminal records. I mean, and I think if our chamber is strong and we continue to work with Paul and Jerry and Della, I mean, we can really repivot those sad numbers and make this region much more prosperous for all Philadelphians and much more inclusive.
I totally agree, and I see the future of Philadelphia coming back and coming strong, especially when you have leadership that understands the issue and has good partners like the Philadelphia African American Chamber of Commerce as well. I think when we have conversations like this, we remove all the barriers of just doing business together. And I think when we really are putting ourselves in other people's shoes and having honest conversations, I think we can all grow together.
Della, do you want to pick up?
Yes, and Paul, there was one part of your research where you had about the amount of dollars that are invested in minority businesses, and you had a Washington, D.C., I think they spend about $6, and Philadelphia was spending less than $1 or percent. Right. I can't remember the date. I don't know if you remember that stat that you had.
Yeah, it was in terms of the economic development activity of city government. Washington was essentially 5 times what we were doing in Philadelphia. That's
correct.
Right.
Correct.
Yeah,
and so,
I'm sorry, could you take 30 seconds just to tell people about enterprise centers?
Oh, I am. But I wanted to pick off of that because I think that's also important for Ron to know as he go around America in the United States, to know that here in Philadelphia, one of our challenges have been the less investment we've made in minorities in order to grow them to scale. And so that's what the Enterprise Center has been focused on for about 30 years now, is how do we scale up minority businesses? But the amount of capital that flows to minority business is very small. So you end up with, you know, I'm reading a book now about scaling up by Vernon Hardish, and it talks about how, you know, most cities have lots of little mice running around and they don't get to gazelles or elephants. And when you think about elephants, they can carry people, they can employ a lot of people. So one of the challenges here in Philadelphia has been the small amounts of money that have flowed through. And so, you know, you can't achieve very much with little bit of money. And so I agree with everything you said, but I do want to put out for Philadelphia to understand that we have put too much emphasis on training and programs. If you go into a distressed community, it's all about job training, it's all about program. But if you go into a prosperous community, there's no training, there's no program. If a kid has an idea in a prosperous community, the family rally around that kid and find some money. They don't say, well, oh, you got to go take a training program. And so I think we have put too much emphasis on training. When you put minority businesses in training programs all the time, they don't have time to raise money and don't have time to grow their company. So I really want Philadelphia to start to de-emphasize that myth that minority businesses need training in order to scale up. The second thing that I agree with you on, Ron, was around capital. The Enterprise Center in its most recent years have really become laser focused on capital. We recently have applied for a small business investment company license. We're waiting to hear from SBA on that. We've been putting small amounts of equity into our minority enterprises because patient capital is very, very important. What we found out is that if you make a loan and with the principal amortization, and if that capital is high cost, then that entrepreneur is a risk manager, versus if you put patient capital, then they are a growth manager. And so most of our minority businesses struggle with their capital stack being too much debt. And so when COVID occurred, I agree with you, it really devastated minority businesses. And I'm happy to be on this call, on this panel with Jerry Sweeney, because I've picked up the phone 2 times and have called Jerry in time of need. And when COVID hit, I picked up the phone because a few years back, Jerry and I had partnered with the Enterprise Center and Brandywine to do Grow Philadelphia Fund, which is specifically focused on construction firms. And so when COVID hit, I knew that construction firms had very little cash reserve anyway. And so without a doubt, Jerry stepped to the plate. And we've been able to save 17 construction-related firms, been able to provide 1% interest money, no closing costs, no application fee, not a dime of that money was used for the Enterprise Center operation. And I am just so pleased. And so what will happen is, this is a recycled fund. Once these businesses pay us back, we will loan that money at 1% to new clients who need it. And this is what we need in Philadelphia. We need other people to step up who have some cash reserve and allow us to use that money to help our small businesses stay in business and recover during this time, because it is so, so important. I just want to emphasize that when you are a non-minority, you probably have some family and friend networks. So you can save your business from taking high interest credit card, predatory lending. Predatory lenders actually focus on minority enterprises because they know they're desperate. They know that they can't meet payroll on Friday. And so what we've been trying to do is use other channels of capital to help save them from these predatory lenders. And then finally, we did step up and take a lot of risks with PPP. With the amount of money that the SBA was providing in terms of a percentage if you completed, it took us a tremendous amount of technical assistance to work with our business, but we did deploy about close to $20 million in PPP loans, and predominantly all of that went to minority enterprises. But it was challenging. We had a goal set to do $100 million, but because minorities didn't have the paperwork, they only had 1099, we were not able to meet our goal. And so it showed us not only the deficiencies of minority enterprises, but also the lack of infrastructure at SBA to be able to help us overcome some of these challenges we were faced with in trying to do PPP. So in closing remarks, I just want to applaud Paul Levy and CCDC for bringing this topic to the forefront. I'm happy, and I think over the next year, I want us to have this conversation more and more in Philadelphia, because until we address Black businesses in this city, we will not have the kind of recovery that we want to have, and we won't see economic parity unless we all work together. And so I want to thank you, Ron, and I want to thank you, Paul, and Jerry. Certainly, you are a friend of the Enterprise Center, and I want to say thank you.
Della, there's one comment that you also made that I think is extremely important, and that is many Black firms are forced or are fortunate enough to maybe get a city or state or even federal contract. The challenge is in many of those small firms, the federal government may pay net 120 days. You can get a contract January 1st and may not get paid until June, which means that a small business now has to go get a loan, pay that high interest rate just to carry the float of a federal or state or even local government contract, which we feel is really puts us at a disadvantage. If a local community, a local state, city government has an opportunity to provide a contract, what we have asked is that there be a net 15-day payment plan. Under the last administration, during the last recession, the Obama administration implemented the prompt pay program, which said if you invoiced, you would get paid in net 15 days. That would allow many Black-owned businesses to continue to prosper, not just through tough times, but as well through good times. And that is a long-term strategy that could be implemented without any policy changes, with just payment term changes, which local governments could definitely implement and have a huge impact on many of the small Black-owned businesses there in Philadelphia.
Yeah, Paul, I just want to mention one other quick thing is that we see a tremendous need for public sanitizing as a result of COVID-19. And so if you think about janitorial firms, and Ron, you mentioned you had one time, when you think about it, janitorial firms have lost a good amount of their business. And many of them are small, many of them high re-entry part-time workers. And because we all are working primarily remote, the need for office cleaning, you know, vacuum cleaning, mopping, cleaning bathrooms now, those contracts have been either reduced or taken away. And so we're trying to pivot those small janitorial firms and shift them to sterilization and sanitizing in public spaces, whether it be, i.e. restaurants, you know, SEPTA and those things. And so we're trying to help them get contract, right, to do sterilization. And we're willing to put the money up for the what we call sterilization in a box. And so I think there is a way that we can pivot certain industries that are struggling out of COVID into new added value services. And so I just want to put that out there as one that we're working on at the Enterprise Center.
Della, thanks for that great suggestion. Let me turn it to Jerry now, and then remind people, if you look on the bar, there's a chat function. Please email or chat in some questions. I'll be reading them off as we go forward. So let me turn it to our final panelist, Jerry Sweeney. And Jerry, I'll operate your PowerPoint, so just tell me when you want me to advance.
Okay, great. Thanks, Paul. And look, it's delightful to be here with Ron, you, and to meet you, and Della and Steve, and I always enjoy our interactions. Look, we titled this PowerPoint, which is pretty brief, you know, looking through a different window. And the reason for that is a lot of the issues that Ron and Della and Steve touched on, we've been dealing with in the city for a long period of time. And I think if you think of Philadelphia metaphorically as a house, sometimes you need to look through a different window to see a different angle on an existing situation. So I think, Ron, the pillars you outlined are very much in tune with what we've experienced as well. You know, Philadelphia's Paul's slideshow has had really very low family sustaining job growth for a long period of time. We've had little diversity in our trade unions, which has resulted in a lack of local labor content and really generationally high structural unemployment. Very little growth capital available for small businesses. And the inability, I think, from a public policy standpoint, for a lot of our leadership to have the vision to craft a strategic plan for the city that would really put our house, the Philadelphia, on a path towards equitable and durable economic growth. And even as Paul talks about, even before the pre-COVID, the economic growth that we were having trailed far below our sister cities. And as a result, it was amazing for me as a business person to see how alarmingly contented our public policymakers were with our slow rate of growth. And that we didn't use that period of recovery to really change some of the foundational points that are involved in how we move the city forward. So kind of given that framework, you know, we talked about the word intentional a number of times. We went on a listening tour a couple of years ago, and through our development construction folks and myself and others, we just spent time listening to what the challenges were that emerging nascent stage Black and other minority owned businesses were facing. And I think we've really touched on a lot of those key points with you know, the lack of capital available to grow their businesses, or Ron, as you touched on, even liquidity to bid on jobs, because there's a long time frame between getting the job and getting the check. So there was a real dearth of liquidity in order to grow those businesses. There was also an inability to break into very long established procurement channels in existing businesses, and a limited ability to recruit from local labor markets, given the lack of diversity in the trade unions that really dominate the labor market in Philadelphia. And we also understood that there was, frankly, a well-established cadre of Black and minority-owned businesses that were very well politically connected. But that, even with the value they had, that did serve as a gating issue for bringing new companies into a growth mode. So we really wanted to focus on how we could wind up using the developments that we were undertaking, particularly Schuylkill Yards, which is a large development here in the city, to expand some of our diversity programs. And we really do believe that our buildings are bridges to the communities, both as a positive catalyst for change, but also just from a pure investment standpoint. We recognize the ultimate value of the buildings we create really is inextricably linked to the vitality and the vibrancy of the communities in which we build. So there's a mutuality of interest to make sure that not only do we create great real estate projects like a lot of our peer development companies, but the environment in which we build those has growth trajectories that will sustain economic value. And I also think, as we phrased here, we've always believed in challenging the status quo, particularly given the long tenured nature of some of these significant issues. You really do need to look at things a bit differently. And while certainly, even with the great work that we've been doing with Della, we really can't move the needle that much, but we can start to lay some of the foundational points. So I guess, Paul, if you just move to the next slide, we really wound up working with a variety of stakeholders to really craft what we call our neighborhood engagement initiative, which was really focused on 5 key elements, and I'll go through those quickly on the next slides. But basically, providing capital through our affiliation with Della on the Growth Philadelphia Capital Fund, creating a pathway to family-sustaining jobs through sponsoring our construction apprenticeship program, kicking off a local sourcing initiative that was really geared to try and break into very established procurement channels, reaching out into the community and selecting community development corporations as our co-developers on large-scale projects to provide a revenue stream for them, but also give them some capacity building and letting them sit at the table as we start to craft through some large-scale projects. And then creating a community fund that really did delegate the authority and the wisdom where it should be to the neighborhoods in which we were doing business. So on the next slide, we get into a couple of those a little more in detail. Ron, as you touched on, in terms of percentage of Black-owned businesses, I think one of the things that struck us was that less than 7% of the construction firms in Philadelphia are minority-owned, and that's the broader category, not just Black, which is kind of startling, which really highlighted for us the need to do whatever we could do to incubate some growth. So the fund that we framed out with Della, and they've done an amazing job administering that, and there's great days ahead for that. We've already funded in 13 loans to 11 businesses. And then the other thing that we did, which we think is pretty interesting, is that in all of the contracts that we're letting, there's an obligation for our vendors, our suppliers, to meet the local labor content and minority and Black hiring programs that we outline. To the extent they don't, it's going to cost them some money. So they need to kind of give some money back if they don't meet those goals. So it's kind of the carrot and the stick approach. And when that money, if they don't meet their goals and that money comes back, it goes to Della. It goes in as permanent capital into that fund, which we thought was a very effective way to make sure that there was complete alignment between what we were trying to achieve and what our vendors were trying to do. And it's that linkage, I think, is very, very important. On the next slide, Paul, we talk about our construction apprenticeship preparatory program. That was really the genius of Walt McGill, who recently passed away. He had this program in place with some retired Black union members to try and create a pathway to job growth for either underemployed Black Philadelphians. We sponsored that program with him. We're in our 3rd class. It's a 15-week program. It's to discipline those students in taking the apprenticeship exams for the trades. Our commitment is that if they pass those apprenticeship tests and they get into the union, we'll find through our buying power in Philadelphia a job for them on a Brandywine job, or make sure they find employment with another contractor. And thus far, we've got about 47 students who are now on a path to having family-sustaining jobs and a career in front of them, which they did not have before. The local sourcing initiative, still at its early stages, was really designed to present local businesses to our larger companies that occupy a lot of our buildings, and to provide those companies with an incentive to hire these smaller companies by Brandywine subsidizing 10% of the first year's contract cost to open up the door for them to move forward with their business growth plans. And then the final, Paul, the next slide. The final other elements I thought were really very interesting for us, and we learned a lot just by listening to people. We, through an RFP process, went out to a number of community development corporations and selected one for each of the current projects we have underway. They will get a source of revenue. So they're actually a co-developer. They sit at all of our development meetings. They have input. They learn. They contribute. They get a source of revenue. They also see, as I mentioned earlier, the way a large project works and how it comes together. And then they're able to basically use that experience to do their core mission work in their communities. And that's been a very successful undertaking. It was also a way, quite frankly, for us to challenge the status quo in Philadelphia by expanding the network of community groups that come into our projects versus always following down the traditional path of political connections. And then the last piece really was something that we learned from 4 different community groups in West Philadelphia of what was important to them. And as opposed to being a developer that kind of walked in and did something in terms of giving money and identifying what the specific use was, we worked with those groups to make sure we understood what was important to them. And then basically they formed a collective of those 4 community organizations who in turn can allocate, as they see they can get the best value in the neighborhood, the money that we're providing. And I think that has a level of durability to it that is going to be very, very effective. So we're pretty excited about that. On the next slide, we just touched on a couple of other programs that we working with Stephen on a loan program through the African American Chamber of Commerce here in Philadelphia. And then certainly following Della's great leadership and her connection points, we were happy to work with her on a COVID resilience fund and create another source of permanent capital for that program. So just to wrap out, I think, as we look at on the last slide, Philadelphia as a slow growth, somewhat politically fractured city, absent of some significant business leadership. We really felt that, kind of creating and working with organizations to create a fabric of growth would be very, very important. And we were fortunate enough to align ourselves with folks like Della, Stephen, and a whole range of other people that are all committed towards the objectives of not just creating a placebo or a near-term impact, but actually laying the foundational points that can actually create a better Philadelphia tomorrow than we have today. And I think, frankly, coming out of this pandemic provides an amazing opportunity for the city to revisit some of these core foundational points that I think can drive us to success. So, Paul, thanks very much for including Brandywine in this. We really appreciate it.
Great. Well, let me thank all our panelists for some really great presentations and content. And most remarkably, we're a minute ahead of schedule, which is just astounding at this point. I've got several questions that have come to me. One from Michael Pearson, who actually spoke at one of our panels about a year ago. And Jerry, you partially answered this, so let me throw this to Ron. Michael, who has run his own businesses here in Philadelphia, wants to get examples of best practices where there are large majority firms who have found a way to buy locally from suppliers or contract locally. Jerry just gave an example, but Ron, if you have some other examples that we could draw from here. Ron, you're muted. You're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. That's a great question because right now, Black Lives Matter is trending very positively. I live right outside of Washington, D.C., and I can remember going down in D.C., the heart of D.C. in January, and seeing stores that were obviously white owned. No question about it, no big deal. You can go back now in March and April and see those same storefronts with Black Lives Matter posters on the front, Black dollars spent here will be appreciated, Black owned posters on the outside. And we know that it's not Black owned. We know that it's still the same white ownership as it was in 2019 and January of 2020. But because of the fact that there's no real accountability and there's really no leverage, white firms are taking advantage of a tough time for Black Americans. And so that's why part of the reason that we created the Buy Black platform. And so for corporate America to be able to find Black firms as well as Black citizens and major citizens that are looking to support Black businesses, that's why it is extremely important. Now, what we have done with our corporate partners, we have two different groups. We have our President Circle, which are our largest Black businesses around the country. And then we have our Corporate Advisory Council, which are our larger corporate partners. We put them together to ensure that they're doing business with one another. We've asked our corporate partners to agree to spending 15% of their supply chain with Black firms. And we then look at their 2021 spend. And so between now and the end of the year, we can try to do some matchmaking to give them options. Again, we're not making decisions for the corporation, and we're definitely not making decisions for the small or the Black business. Our role is just to put the two together to see how we can work together, as well as tier 2 firms. Those large contracts that are awarded to majority firms in many cases still have goals of tier 2, tier 3, and even sometimes tier 4 spend. And we make sure that they get to meet Black firms, local firms as well across the country, so that we can keep those dollars as well as the accountability back to our corporate partners, as well as the Black and small local businesses that need the business the most.
Great, thank you. We have a question from someone we all know, Councilman Alan Dom. I'll direct this probably to you, Della and Stephen. Very specifically, what are 3 things that local government could do in the coming year to really focus on this issue and make real progress? Della, do you want to take that first?
Yes, the first one is to build on what I initially said was when the city flows capital to distress and to small businesses, stop deploying that capital in the form of training programs and programs specifically related to training, and let it flow as investment capital so it can be recycled and reused. The third thing is to work with the city to figure out how they can pay faster, because the city has goals as well, and they're not able to meet that goals because most minorities do not want to do business with the city because they're slow pay. And so we got to solve that problem if the city wants to have a higher participation of minorities who respond to RFPs. And then lastly, the city is going to have to unleash more and more capital, because it's going to take capital to really turn around the minority enterprise. They cannot do that just based on a good business plan or whatever. They need capital plus the contracts. And so if the city is able to unleash contracts with a quick turnaround for payment, similar to what Ron was saying about the 15 days or whatever at a city level, and as well as helping us to be able to raise capital, then we can have large elephant-sized businesses. The United States has about 2,500 minority enterprises, predominantly Black, that are generating 25 million or more, and we probably don't have but 1 or 2 of those here in Philadelphia.
Great. Stephen, do you want to
I mean, Della hit on most of the major keys. I mean, the only thing that I can really encourage the city to do is to continue to facilitate, you know, the ads and meds and small businesses to, again, expand their vendor and their supplier diversity roles, continue to use that platform as our political leaders and bring parties together to matchmake. I just think that's key. And again, continue to make the environment much more business friendly so that minority firms can get the opportunity to grow once this capital and opportunities available. But again, I concur with most of the same points that Della made.
Great.
I think transparency is important.
Okay.
Business owners want transparency. There's nothing in the world more frustrating to a business owner to hear about new opportunities, construction opportunities, infrastructure opportunities, and they either don't know how to participate, have not heard about the opportunities in their local communities. There's got to be an intentional opportunity set up for the businesses and the communities that have been hit the hardest. This is, and again, it's got to be very specific in reference to how we go forward.
Great. Got a question from Sandy Smith from the Philadelphia Magazine. Jerry, I'm going to put this one to you first. Which is the greatest obstacle to forming Black-owned businesses? Taxes, regulation, or access to capital? It'll be hard to choose, but I thought you would.
Can you repeat that again, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, the question of the biggest barriers, the biggest obstacles, taxes, regulations, or access to capital.
Well, they're all important items. I'd step back from that for a second, and I guess the way I look at it is, you know, it's the tone starts at the top. They're all kind of tactics and not strategies. I think you know, I forget who said it, but many years ago, someone said we need bold colors and not pale pastels. And I think in the city, we need to address all three of those items. I think everyone knows, even if they won't admit it publicly, that the tax structure we have in this city is a significant issue to creating peer city level job growth. That's a big issue for the city. I mean, we're in terms of providing capital and reducing regulations on small businesses. This city is over-regulating everything. Paperwork flow is amazingly complicated. But we need to focus on growing the city because the city has many, many businesses, Black-owned, minority-owned, other small emerging businesses that can't grow their slice because the pie of our city is not growing significantly enough. So they're all fighting for the same constant dollar versus creating a growth format. So if I had to prioritize, I might say taxes, capital, and regulation.
Right. Della and then Ron, do you want to?
Sure.
I agree. All three are challenging and should be addressed concurrently and at the same time rather than siloed. And so I agree with what Jerry said in regards to them. But certainly capital is at the forefront. We got to figure out how we attract more capital to Philadelphia.
I would agree with Della. I think, again, the top three concerns for Black-owned businesses is access to capital, and not just being able to get it, but have it be affordable. And so I think access to capital, you have to start there. And then I think access to opportunity is second.
Yeah, I mean, I would just jump in here with the findings of our study to echo something that Della said, which is not to silo these, because clearly, I mean, everything Ron, you have said and everything we've heard from Stephen is clearly access to capital is the #1 hurdle. But access to capital in a city that's not growing many businesses, where there aren't many contracting opportunities, becomes a problem as well. So I think it's a both and. We need both to provide access to capital to grow Black businesses. But as Jerry said, we need this growing pie. So there's more contracting and more wealth, frankly, to share and participate in this city. Stephen, do you want to jump in?
I mean, you guys hit all the key points. I mean, again, I think we have to continue to use that word intentional. all the parties, whether it's government leaders, civic leaders, business leaders, we have to be intentional about this and focus on those 3 pillars is crucial, because if there's no growth, there's no opportunities, small or minority-owned firms. But I think if we try to tackle the 3 collectively and not compete them, one, taxes versus regulations, all competing against one another, I think, we can turn the curve and move forward.
Yeah, I just want to read a comment we got from Harold Epps, our former Commerce Director, again echoing that we need both institutional and corporate intentionality, a real goal to be contracting. And we'll all give Harold a hard time here because he ends at the end here. We also must insist that everybody gets paid faster. And since we know Harold's in the Commerce Department, we won't blame him for what's happening now. We have other questions, or Ron, I mean, you've heard a couple of questions here. Some comments you have more broadly from what you saw from the study that we did, or from what you've heard so far, or comments on what Jerry's doing.
No, I think Philadelphia, based upon what I've heard, the data that I've seen, first off, I would commend you for bringing this to the forefront of your city. I think so often there's no accountability and nothing gets acted upon if there's no measurement. And so I applaud Philadelphia for seeing the issues and then trying to bring solutions that are directed towards the communities that need it the most. And so I applaud you there. I appreciate the opportunity for the U.S. Black Chamber there. And I also want to give Philadelphia a little bit of credit and say, this is not unique to Philadelphia. We are seeing this happening in other cities. I was surprised and somewhat disappointed when I saw that there were only 2% participation in reference to Black-owned businesses there in the city, because Philadelphia is a city that I loved, still appreciate, still understand the importance of a city of brotherly love, especially during these periods of time. But there's such an upside. If there's only 2% Black firms now, even if we triple that, it's still not going to be enough. But I definitely think that we can be intentional to grow those numbers and to move the metric forward for Black firms.
Great.
Anything we can do here at the U.S. Black Chamber, from funding, the technical assistance, and most importantly, there's got to be more CDFIs involved, Black-owned banks involved, so that we can have real relationships with financial institutions to be able to get us through tough times like these as well as the future.
Great. So we've invited people to ask questions. Looks like in an audience where you have to drag people to raise their hands. We're dragging them for chat. So, I mean, we can wrap this up relatively soon, but I want to invite, Stephen, if you want to make any concluding remarks, and then Jerry as well. I'd like to know in terms of what you heard from others, and then I'll just wrap up from our perspective. But Stephen, first of all, thank you for inviting Ron here and introducing him to the Philadelphia audience, but your priorities in the coming year.
Well, Paul, I wanted to thank you and the Center City District for this type of leadership. I think the only way this region can get better is continuing dialogue like this and looking at tough, uncomfortable issues like this. I mean, it's easy for us to stay in our silos, but the only way there's going to be any kind of growth or change in the curve if we continue to meet, put our business minds, our civic minds together, and try to push the needle and challenge each other. So I wanted to thank you for your leadership. And again, we need more people like Jerry Sweeney to step up to the table. I mean, we talk about the major issue for minority businesses, the lack of capital. I mean, Jerry has made funding available for African-American businesses through the Enterprise Center with contractors and through our organization. So again, we need to be intentional. We need to continue to push the needle and continue to work collectively for our region to improve, so we don't have to talk about, these high poverty issues or these low minority-owned business issues, but we can talk about how we can continue to elevate and move forward. But thank you. And again, the chamber is here to facilitate. Our membership during this period has been growing. I mean, we've been making funds available to our members, and we're having our annual meeting next month, and we would hope the Senate City District will partner with us because we're going to recognize Jerry and we're going to recognize Dan Hill for their leadership in this region. But thank you very much for allowing us to participate.
Thank you. Jerry, do you want some comments?
No, look, I think we're just honored to participate. It's a very, very important issue. I think some of the topics that Ron and Della touched on in particular are things that resonate with us. And look, there's a lot of other developers in the city who are doing the similar things like we're trying to do. I think we recognize we have to be, as you've all mentioned, intentional about how we grow this city. And I think if we take a holistic approach that we're all part of the same ecosystem, the only way we actually drive ourselves forward is if we do make a definable, disciplined plan to make this city perform better. We have to perform better on the job growth side. I would encourage, as a lot of us always do, encourage our political leaders to think outside the box. Think about how we can actually deploy capital more rationally through the city, encourage business growth, and really make Philadelphia, as a lot of us talk about, one of the top 5 job growing cities in the country. Ron, you touched on in your opening comments what a great city Philadelphia is. Well, I think Philadelphia is tired of being a city of unrealized potential. There's opportunity here for everybody. We need extraordinarily strong, disciplined public leadership and actively engaged business community to make sure that we lay out a very clear agenda. And part of that is as we talked about earlier, is really fundamentally re-examining some of the foundational points that have got this city to the state that it's in right now. And I just close saying, look, anytime you're in a crisis, it's always a blend of danger and opportunity. I think human nature is such that we've all been focusing on the danger side of everything, whether it was through the city's budget crisis or whatever else the city government was doing. I would encourage us, it's now time to focus on the opportunity. And certainly, creating more durability to some of these programs that Dell and Stephen and Ron touched on, I think are seminal foundation points to creating a stronger Philadelphia. So now's the moment for us to do that. So Paul, thanks for pulling this agenda together. Hopefully it will be the first of many different dialogues around the city to make sure that it's not just a passing conversation, it's actually a disciplined execution of public policy and business leadership.
Barry, thank you. Before I wrap up, Ron, do you want to give us any sort of closing benediction here as well? As we know that I've learned that Ron's mother was a Baptist minister, so I'll give you the closing moment here.
Well, no, again, thank you guys so much for allowing us to participate. This is an election year, and you'll hear a lot about making America great again. And I kind of paraphrased this earlier. And I think Black people want America to be great as well. But in order for there to be a great America, there must be a great Black America. And in order for there to be a great Black America, there must be great Black businesses. And in order for there to be great Black businesses, we need great relationships, great conversation, as well as great commitment from the leaders of cities like Philadelphia to ensure that we have a successful America for all of its citizens. And so the U.S. Black Chamber, our 300,000 members, are really excited to support what's happening in the city of Philadelphia. Our national conference is in 2 weeks, October the 14th through the 16th. You can go online, find out about it. It's $20.20 unless you get a free registration code, which we'll provide to Stephen at byblackconference. I'm sorry, byblackconference.us. Or you can just go to our website, usblackchambers.org. Appreciate everyone here. I'm looking forward to being in Philadelphia very soon as this COVID-19 passes through.
Great. And just in closing, for us in doing this report, we were not surprised to see what has been known for a long time, that there are huge disparities between Black-owned businesses and white-owned businesses. That wasn't news. What was the disturbing part of this study was how Philadelphia was lagging peer cities like New York, Boston, Washington, and Atlanta. And for us, that directly connects to a theme that Jerry struck as well, which is that we have a slow growth city, which is not creating enough opportunities for everyone. So we really see this, and using that theme opportunity, it's an opportunity to focus on both growing Black-owned businesses through capitalization, through intentionality of contracting, but recognizing that this is a moment to change that curve of slow growth, that the whole city needs to be on a much faster, accelerated pattern of growth so everyone can participate in this. So let me again thank Ron for joining us from Washington, Della and Stephen and Jerry, and thank all the CPDC members for joining in. If you have additional questions, please follow up. The study's on our website, but thank you very much for joining us this morning. There's more work to be done. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.